Welcome to Fade to PB8. In today's episode, we'll be coloring in this image of a woman's face. So I'll go ahead and start from the beginning and just kind of walk you through step by step some of my thought process and how I achieved some of the colors that I accomplished. I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you very much. So I start just filling in these little small gaps in the background, and I use a really dark brown for this. It's going to be darker than the hair, and the way that I know that for sure is because I've already picked out my palette for the hair and for everything except for the skin at this point. So where do you begin? Do I start with the leaves? Do I do the flowers, the hair, the skin first? Now I normally do the background first, and there's the reason why you might want to ask yourself is that the skin is definitely going to be the hardest part of this. And, do I knock out the hardest part first and then do the easier parts later? Or do I do the easy parts and then I have those colors down and then I can use this as reference for the harder part, which is the skin. So I choose the latter, and that's filling out the background and the sides first and the hair first. And the reason why I do that is actually I kind of learned this from experience. There was one time I did a picture of an Egyptian, and I started with the skin, and I went with this dark brown, and he almost ended up looking African American when the rest of the paper was white and not colored in. But by the time I colored in the background of that image of the Egyptian, the skin lightened up tremendously. He looked like it was much lighter brown skin. And I was actually really, really surprised. So whenever I do skin, I always save it for last, even though it's the most difficult part. Just because you can reference things around it, and it really helps you choose like your colors and how dark you want to go. And definitely do the hair before the skin. Hair is a lot easier than skin. And since it's immediately surrounding the skin area, you can really compare what it's going to look like. So for the leaves here, I just started with my light greens, and I just kind of scatter them around. I'm looking for an ununiform distribution of ink just to create that natural look that you've got in leaves and basically anything in nature, really. It's not going to be monotone like it would be with a man-made object, but you also have to work in the shadows too. So you've got kind of two different things going on. You've got the natural variations of the tone, and then you just got shadows from your source of light, which I have to the right in this case. So I almost always use the brush tip when I color in, and I find the brush tip is best for blending ink. It's really good for applying ink, and probably 9 times out of 10 I use the brush tip. The chisel tip is pretty good for applying ink, but it's not the best for blending. The chisel tip tends to kind of push the ink into the paper, and then whatever color you're using with that chisel tip will end up dominating. So you can actually end up going lighter with the chisel tip, which is another thing it's great for. But still, the brush tip I think is superior. And the other reason why you might want to use the chisel tip is just because it doesn't take as much damage as the brush tip does. So if you want to preserve your tip, use the chisel tip. That's something good for like a very large area, say like a big blue sky. Yeah, fill in most of that color with the chisel tip, but when it gets to blending, use the brush tip. So for these flowers, it's something similar to the leaves, the natural. So we've got natural variations of the color of the leaves, but then also, I'm doing the necklace now. But for the flowers, natural variations of the leaves, but also shadow from your light source. So it's kind of a combination of both. You can try doing something like do all the natural variations first, then apply your shadows. Or you can apply your shadows and then do the natural variations. Or you can kind of combine them together at the same time. As long as that ink is wet and you're doing it all at once, you can kind of jump back and forth between the two and get some nice mixtures of ink. You don't want to let it dry completely. If you let it dry, you can't blend it anymore. You can always go back over dried ink, but it's a little bit more difficult to work with. So I typically try to get everything done in one session. Now I do all the flowers at once. I'm not just doing one flower, then the next flower, and then the next flower. And the reason why is because I want them to be consistent. And you'll notice I'm using, I don't know, maybe about 10 markers, 15 markers. for these flowers. And there's a lot of different steps. I'm jumping back and forth between the markers a lot. So if I do the first flower, and I use all 10 or 15 markers in various steps, I have to remember those steps for the next flower and the next flower. And that can get confusing because you want them to look consistent. If you don't follow the same steps, they might not look like they go together. So do all the flowers at once. Maybe unless there's 100 flowers, then you might have to break it up, because then you want to work with the wet ink. And if the ink dries on you because you're working on too many flowers at once, then it just takes too much time. You might not be able to get those good blends. But really try, if you can, to do it all at once. It will just end up looking a lot better. Now for the paper, I'm using 80-pound paper for this. I usually use between 65 and 80-pound paper. It's just better because you can apply many layers of ink compared to, say, printer paper, which you can really only apply maybe like 3 or 4 layers before it gets fully saturated. And we don't want it to get fully saturated, as if you just dumped a glass of water on it. There is a happy medium between totally saturated and completely dry. So if the more dry the ink is, the less it blends, and the more you'll have like a step from one color to another. So if I want like a hard shadow, I should let the ink dry completely and then apply the shadow color, and that will leave more of a line. So that would be more if I had like one single point light source, let's say a light bulb, then I want a hard shadow, then I let the ink dry a little bit and then come in with that dark color. But in this case, it's kind of ambient lighting. My light source is to the right a little bit, so I'm applying the darker colors while the ink is still wet. So for the hair, I start with the lightest brown, and I probably could have gone without using this brown, or at least just using this brown in just the highlight areas. I use a lot of ink of that lightest color. Now, it's not to say that what I did was wrong. It's just I use a lot of ink of that lightest color, and you're not even going to see it towards the end. So I probably could have jumped to the second or third lightest. But at least by getting that first color down, it's just getting the paper wet. Now, this hair is a very large surface area, so when I finish, like, say, the right side, I'm working on the right side for a little bit, a lot of the ink on the left side will dry. So you want to kind of keep working your way around. Try to keep the ink uniform and about the same wetness, for lack of a better word. And that will just help you like control the ink and know how it works. And so come back and revisit spots that you haven't touched in a while. Even just go over it with a really light marker. That will just keep it wet without changing the color. So that's another good strategy. I'm using this light orange as a highlight color. It's not going to stick out too much, but it is going to show an indication of a reflection of the light by using that orange. So I always go light to dark, and this really is no exception. And I'm just working my way up through the darker colors, the darker browns, applying the shadow here beneath the flowers to make it look like the flowers are actually in her hair. And I think overall it turns out pretty well. So a lot of times I'll go with like my lightest, second lightest, third lightest, but then sometimes I go to the darkest marker and work my way back towards the light markers. So that's what I do here. So it gives me kind of a goal. I put down the lightest colors, then I put down the darkest markers, and then my goal becomes to kind of get those to come together by using some of my medium markers. There's different patterns you can do, but again, I always start with the lightest markers. Just as long as the paper is wet, I think it's okay to apply the darkest marker and then work your way back down to the medium markers. But don't start with the darkest marker. It will be much harder to make corrections and blend things together a little bit later. So here I'm going over everything. So I've gone over everything just kind of sporadically, but now I'm bringing it all together by going over everything with like a medium brown. And it'll bring all the colors closer together, but still you're going to see those highlights. The the ink is still wet, so I'll probably hit the orange one more time. I can't remember. I did this. Yeah, I'm using the orange one more time to hit the highlights. I drew this yesterday, so I don't remember exactly everything I did. So now I'm coming up on the skin, and I start with the lips here. This image had lips already kind of shaded, and I know it's more fun to do it yourself, but sometimes it comes shaded, and you should just kind of work with what they give you. And it actually made the looks look really nice using only one color. So, I would prefer to shade it myself, but sometimes you're stuck with the image that you get. Now this image is actually AI generated. I think I just typed in something like a woman's face and it came up with this. And the AI is really fun to work with. I highly suggest it. And this image came out really nicely. There is one mistake. You can see her left braid that kind of hangs over her left shoulder, just kind of stops, but you don't really notice it too much. So I decided to work with this drawing. Now you want to know where the attention is going to be drawn. When you show this to a friend, they're probably just going to look at the image for, 5-10 seconds, and just immediately your attention is going to be drawn to her eyes. That's the first thing. So I spent a little more time on the eyes, just used 3 different colors for the irises, and then I used a cool gray for the whites of her eyes. And by the end of it, since I'm coloring in everything around it, those cool grays will end up looking pretty white just from the contrast. So, all right, the skin's tough. There's no doubt about it. What's nice is you can always go darker. So my goal here, you can see I selected, maybe 25 markers, maybe 30 markers for the skin. But I'm starting off with the lightest ones that I have that are all in the same family. So I think it's YR402 and YR404, YR406 and YR407. So they're all in the same YR4 family. And then I'm kind of molding the image together before I start applying the other colors. So skin is tough. There's no doubt about it. Keep in mind, I'm working on a large surface area, and I want you to notice just how I kind of keep going darker and darker and darker. My goal initially was to have her be more Caucasian with fair skin, but in the very end, she ends up looking much more tan, almost even a little Hispanic. But that's fine, because it's okay. Whenever you're working on an object, you should ask yourself, how dark can I go? With skin, you can just keep going darker and darker. Hair, keep going darker and darker. Clothes, darker and darker. But with leaves and the flowers, you can only go so dark and have it keep its natural appearance. So just keep in mind how dark something can end up being and still looking like it belongs. So before I had hitting these darker markers, I had gone over it several times. So the paper is somewhat damp. It's not fully saturated because it's pretty large surface area, and it's taking me a while to go through everything. But I want you to notice how the skin just kind of keeps getting darker and darker. And then what I do once it gets fairly damp is I bring in kind of my darkest color. I think it's kind of like a very dark reddish brown, which I'm doing right now. And then that becomes my goal, is to kind of bring the colors together. So bring those darkest colors in together with the lightest colors. And I kind of apply too much of the dark colors, if I'm honest, especially below the chin. I wasn't terribly happy with that, so I end up really trying to beat it into the paper, coming back with my lightest markers to bring it together. But eventually I there was a point during this drawing, right around here, where I wanted to just tear this paper apart. I was like, there's no way I'm fixing this. It doesn't look great. I applied that shadow on the right side of her face, kind of came too close to her nose. So how do I fix this? And I do my best to fix it without changing the base color of her skin. But eventually I say to myself, you know what? She's just going to have darker skin. She's going to maybe be a little bit more tan. And that's fine, because I'm going to bring those lighter colors closer to the darker colors. Because you can always go darker, but you can't really go that much lighter. So I want you to just kind of notice how the skin changes over time and how I bring it all together. Definitely, don't be afraid to have yourself a large palette for the skin. Um, don't be afraid to try throwing in like a darker red or a darker brown, and then immediately trying to bring it back with your lightest marker to just try to beat it back into the paper. You're gonna make mistakes, and the question is like, how do you handle those mistakes? Like, how do you bring it all together? And sometimes those mistakes will like really work out in your favor. So I'm kind of molding her face like a piece of clay. I'm not going for the final color right away. But I'm also not working just like one section of her face. I'm doing the whole thing at once. So here I am right now, just going over everything with a slightly darker marker, and that will just bring the lights closer to the dark parts. And I can kind of reference the hair. I can reference leaves and the things around her. It says know how much shadow that I really need. So I think initially I had too much shadow. There was too much contrast relative to the hair and leaves. So that's why I went a lot darker with her base color skin. And I think she ends up looking really nice. The shading on the inside of her nose, like on the bright side, her left side, I think was just a little bit off. But like everything else in this drawing came out pretty well. And yeah, just notice how the color is changing. And I'm just not giving up. I'm always moving. I'm always applying ink. Even if I'm just kind of contemplating what my next move is, I'm still applying like the lightest colors. You can apply the lightest colors just to keep the paper wet without really changing the colors. So those light colors end up becoming more of like a blending tool and a tool to just kind of keep the paper wet. But just keep your marker moving. Don't step away. Don't go off to the bathroom. Try to do it all at once if you can. It's a lot easier to change the color with wet ink as opposed to letting it dry and then trying to change the color a little bit later. And the only time you really want to let it, like I said earlier, the only time you really let it dry completely and then apply more color is to apply like a dark shadow or a sharp shadow. And sometimes you can see I flipped over the paper there to see how saturated it was. It got pretty fully saturated, so I couldn't really do much more with it. And here I'm just putting down some weight on it to prevent it from warping as it dries. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm just going to show you what the final result is here for a little while. And then you can see that when it dries up, the ink actually dries a little bit lighter than when it's wet. And the colors really do come together even after you're done coloring. As it dries, the colors start to come together a little bit better. And I think this turned out pretty nicely. So I'm going to give myself maybe a B plus or an A minus. I think the shading is a little bit off on her face, but for the most part, it's pretty good. And your initial impression is pretty good too. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.